In a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, in a modest one-story house with a well-kept garden, lived a 62-year-old man named Frank Sullivan. Up every morning at 5, watering the roses, reading the paper on the porch, feeding pigeons in the park. By evening, that was his entire world. The neighbors called him Old Frank. Nobody knew that this quiet man was once Colonel Franklin Sullivan, a name that used to sit at the top of classified military files. Frank had served 30 years in the United States Army, from the mountains of Afghanistan to Black Ops missions nobody would ever read about in a history book. But the day he hung up his uniform, he made himself a promise. From now on, he would just be a father. Not a hero, not a colonel, not a man with a chest full of medals, just Emma's dad. Emma's mother had passed away when Emma was 8. Frank raised her alone, sometimes with the discipline of a soldier, sometimes with a tenderness he didn't know he had. Emma never knew what her father had lived through, because Frank never told her a single story from his past. "Dad, why don't you ever talk about the old days?" Emma used to ask. "Because there's nothing special about the old days, sweetheart. The real story is the one being written right now, yours," Frank would say with a smile, brushing it off. The truth was, Frank didn't want his daughter to live even in the shadow of the world that had taken the best years of his youth. He wanted Emma to have a normal, happy life, free of fear, free of weight she didn't need to carry. Emma grew up, went to college, and landed a good job at a marketing firm downtown. That's where she met Ryan Whitmore, sharp, ambitious, always chasing the next big win. They fell in love, and 2 years later, they were talking marriage. Something about Ryan never sat right with Frank, a restlessness in his eyes, an odd urgency whenever money came up. But Frank never said a word against his daughter's happiness. "Dad, you don't like Ryan, do you?" Emma asked once. "Sweetheart, all I know is that you're happy, and that's enough for me," Frank said, though a quiet, nameless worry had already taken root in his chest. The wedding happened. Ryan's mother, Carol Whitmore, ran that family with an iron grip, a woman who weighed every relationship on a scale of profit and loss. Frank understood within the first hour of meeting her that this family wasn't built on love, it was built on leverage. After the wedding, Emma moved into the Whitmore house, and Frank stayed behind in his old home alone, but happy because his daughter's smile was still the same one he remembered from childhood. He had no idea that smile was about to be tested by a storm. 2 years into the marriage, things started to shift. Ryan lost a major account at work, and his career stalled. The financial strain hardened something in him. The man who once brought Emma flowers now snapped over the smallest things. Carol Whitmore had only one concern watching all this unfold: money, and her eyes had landed on a piece of land Frank owned on the outskirts of town, land that had exploded in value as the suburbs kept expanding. "Ryan," Carol said to her son one evening, "your father-in-law has that land out past the highway. Get Emma to talk him into signing it over to her." "He's an old man, living alone. What's he going to do with it? Sell it, and half our problems disappear." "Mom, Frank's not going to just hand that over," Ryan said. "That's your job to figure out. She's his daughter, isn't she? Have her ask." Ryan hesitated at first. But slowly, the hunger for money crept in and drowned out whatever conscience he had left. He started pressuring Emma. "Emma, talk to your dad. Ask him about the land. We could sell it, put a down payment on a real house, maybe even start our own business." "Ryan, that land is everything my dad worked for. How am I supposed to just ask him for it?" "So, what's the point of having a father like that? He doesn't help with money, doesn't help with anything, living off his pension while we struggle." It was the first time Emma had heard her husband speak about her father with that kind of bitterness. It stung, but love blinded her to the warning it should have been. Over the following months, the pressure only grew. Carol started with the digs. "Your father cares more about that land than he does about you. Why does he insist on living alone? Why won't he just sign it over? We only need his name off the deed." One day, Emma worked up the courage to visit her father. "Dad," she said, hesitating, "Ryan was saying, that land you have, if you signed it over to us." Frank went quiet for a moment. There was pain in his eyes, but no anger. He knew these weren't his daughter's words. Someone else had put them in her mouth. "Sweetheart," he finally said, "that land was your mother's dream. I never once considered selling it. But whatever you need, I'll help you with within what I can do." "Not the land, though. I'm sorry." When Emma got home, Ryan and Carol were both furious. "So he just said no?" Carol snapped. "See, Ryan? I told you old people only think about themselves. No thought for their daughter's happiness." Emma tried to defend him. "Mom, he didn't refuse to help. He just doesn't want to sell the land. He's willing to help in other ways." "I don't want to hear it," Carol said, storming out of the room. That night, Ryan didn't raise a hand to Emma, but his words cut deeper than any slap could. "Your father's always been selfish. He's never really loved you. He loves that land more than he's ever loved you." Emma cried herself to sleep that night, but she never once turned her back on her father. Months passed. Ryan and Carol devised a new plan. They found a lawyer who specialized in a particular kind of case, proving elderly people living alone, incapable of managing their own affairs. The strategy was simple. Declare Frank mentally unfit and petition the court to grant legal guardianship over his estate. "He lives alone. Mom's age could easily be early dementia," Ryan explained to the lawyer. "If we can convince the court he's not capable of managing his property, they'll appoint Emma as his legal guardian, and then the family gets to decide what happens to the property," the lawyer said with a thin smile. Emma had no idea any of this was happening. Ryan and Carol kept the entire scheme hidden from her, knowing she'd never go along with it. One afternoon, Ryan showed up at Frank's house, playing the doting son-in-law. "Frank, how are you feeling? Living alone out here? Everything okay?" Frank studied Ryan's face. 30 years in the military had taught him one skill better than any other: reading the difference between truth and performance. He knew this concern wasn't real. "I'm fine, son. Why do you ask?" "Just Emma mentioned you've been forgetting things lately." That was a lie. Emma had said no such thing. But Frank stayed calm. "If that's a concern, we can get a checkup scheduled. I've got nothing to hide." Ryan had hoped for anger, for denial, something he could point to as erratic behavior. Frank's composure threw a wrench into the plan. Still, Ryan and Carol didn't give up. They started lining up false witnesses, a couple of neighbors, bribed with cash, willing to say Frank had been acting strange lately, getting lost on his own street, talking to himself. Frank knew nothing about any of it. He was content in his quiet life, tending his garden, living in his memories, happy in the sound of his daughter's voice on the phone. But the storm was already knocking at the door. One morning, an official envelope arrived at Frank's door. It was a court notice. Ryan Whitmore and his family had filed a petition claiming Frank Sullivan was mentally unfit, requesting the court appoint a legal guardian over his estate. Frank read the paper, his hands trembling not with anger but with a deep, quiet grief. A man who'd spent 30 years defending his country was now being betrayed, in his own home, by his own son-in-law. He called Emma immediately. "Sweetheart, what is this?" Emma had no idea what he was talking about.
"Dad, what notice? I don't know anything about this."
When Emma got home and saw the papers herself, the floor seemed to drop out from under her. She confronted Ryan. "What is this, Ryan? You filed a case against my father?" Ryan's face flickered with panic, then hardened into defensiveness.
"Yes, I did."
"And it's for your own good and his. He's alone. He's getting older. Nobody's looking out for him. We're just trying to take care of him." "Don't lie to me," Emma shouted. "You want that land, don't you? That's what this whole charade is about." Carol stepped in. "It's not a charade, honey. It's the truth. We'll prove it in court. You just need to stay quiet and support your husband." "I will never testify against my father," Emma said flatly. For the first time, Emma understood exactly what kind of house she'd married into, one built entirely on self-interest, dressed up in the language of family. Over the following weeks, Emma tried everything, pleading, reasoning, even begging Ryan to drop it. But between Carol's influence and Ryan's greed, nothing worked. The court date arrived. The courtroom in downtown Columbus was unusually crowded that day. Ryan's lawyer had prepared meticulously coached witnesses, a request for a fabricated medical evaluation, and an emotional speech invoking the protection of vulnerable seniors. Frank walked into the courtroom in a plain button-down shirt. No medals, no rank insignia, nothing to identify him. Just an ordinary older man with a strange, quiet calm in his eyes, the calm before a storm. Ryan's lawyer opened. "Your Honor, my client Ryan Whitmore and his family are simply concerned for the welfare of their elderly father-in-law. Mr. Sullivan lives alone, and at his age he requires proper oversight. We have witnesses who can attest that." One by one, the coached witnesses gave their testimony. A couple of neighbors, paid off, claimed Frank seemed disoriented, talked to himself, didn't recognize people sometimes. Emma sat there in tears, listening to lies dressed up as fact, watching a courtroom take them seriously. The judge turned to Frank. "Mr. Sullivan, do you have anything to say?" Frank stood. His voice carried the same steadiness he once used to calm frightened soldiers under fire. "Your Honor, I have nothing to say in my own defense, but before this court rules, I'd like to submit some documents." The room went still. Ryan's lawyer looked up, caught off guard. Frank reached into a worn leather bag and pulled out a set of files. "This is my military service record," he said. "I served 30 years in the United States Army, Colonel Franklin Sullivan, Silver Star, Bronze Star, with valor. I led combat operations that I still can't discuss in detail. I think this court deserves to know that the man being called mentally incompetent spent 30 years of his life defending this country." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. A couple of reporters, there to cover what they assumed was a routine family dispute, snapped to attention. Ryan's face drained of color. Carol's mouth fell open. Emma sat frozen. "Dad, you were a colonel?" Frank looked at his daughter, his eyes full of quiet apology. "Yes, sweetheart. I kept it from you, because I didn't want you living in the shadow of my past. I wanted you to grow up normal, happy, free. But today, I think it's time the truth came out." The judge examined the files carefully, and something like respect crossed her face. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said, "can you tell the court why you concealed this for so long?" "Because, Your Honor," Frank said, "a soldier's greatest victory isn't the medals he earns. It's giving his family a normal, safe life afterward. I made a promise to myself the day I retired that I'd just be a father from then on. But today, when my own daughter's family tried to have me declared incompetent, I realized the truth needed to come out not for my own pride, but because a lie should never be allowed to win." Chapter 6. The Lies Unravel. The judge ordered cross-examination of the witnesses. Frank's attorney, retained the week before, the moment he'd caught wind that something was wrong, began dismantling their testimony piece by piece. "You said Mr. Sullivan seemed disoriented. Can you tell the court on what date, at what time?" The witness fumbled. I don't remember exactly." "Isn't it true you were promised $1,500 for this testimony?" The witness's eyes dropped to the floor. The courtroom went silent. One by one, the false witnesses crumbled. One of them, in tears, admitted it outright. "I needed the money bad, Your Honor. I lied. Mr. Sullivan's always been kind to us. He never bothered anybody." The judge's expression hardened. She looked directly at Ryan and Carol. "Mr. Whitmore, this is a serious abuse of this court's process. Coaching false witnesses, attempting to have a decorated retired military officer declared incompetent, this isn't just unethical. It's a criminal offense." Whatever confidence Ryan had walked in with was gone. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Carol cut in, trying to shield her son. "Your Honor, this was my doing. Don't drag my son into this. But Frank stood again. This time, his voice carried no anger, only a deep, tired sorrow. Your Honor, I'm not here asking for harsh punishment. I only wanted the truth on record, so my daughter would know her father never betrayed her. I'll leave the rest to the court. The judge considered this for a moment. Mr. Sullivan's grace speaks for itself, but the court has an obligation to the law. The petition is denied. Separately, this court will pursue charges related to witness tampering and fraud upon the court. There was no applause outside the courthouse. This wasn't a movie. But there was a deep, settled quiet, the kind that follows when the truth finally wins. Outside the courthouse, Emma ran straight into her father's arms. Dad, I'm so sorry. I had no idea any of this was happening. Frank held his daughter close. Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. You believed in love. That was never a mistake. Ryan stood off to the side, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Carol seethed with anger, but there was nothing left for her to say. Emma turned to Ryan. I didn't know you were capable of this. You tried to make my father a man who gave his youth to this country look like he'd lost his mind. For money. Emma, Ryan started, but the words caught in his throat. I don't want to hear it, Emma said, tears in her eyes but her voice unwavering. I need time to think. That day, Emma moved back into her father's house, the same house she'd grown up in. Over the following weeks, she cut Ryan out of her life almost entirely. Ryan's world began to collapse. The fallout from the perjury charges brought fines and a formal record. Word spread through their social circle fast, and both he and Carol became known as the family who tried to con the old man. Carol, who'd always been the one pointing fingers, found herself isolated in her own home. Ryan lost his job too. The case had made local news, and his company wasn't willing to risk the association. 3 months passed. Ryan sat with what he'd done, alone, and it started to eat at him. One evening, Ryan worked up the nerve to drive to Frank's house. Standing at the door, he hesitated more than once before finally ringing the bell. Frank opened the door. He wasn't surprised to see Ryan there. He simply stood, waiting. Frank. Ryan's voice shook. I came to apologize. I know it won't undo anything, but I needed to say it. Frank stepped aside and let him in. They sat in the living room. For a while, neither said anything. Go on, Frank finally said. Ryan's eyes welled up. Frank, I let money turn me into someone I don't recognize. I was so consumed by it. I didn't stop to think about who I was hurting my wife's father, a man who spent his whole life protecting people he'd never even meet. I'm disgusted with myself. Frank listened without interrupting. I lost Emma too, Ryan said, his voice breaking. And I know I deserved that. But Frank, if there's even a small part of you that could find room for this, I want to change. I mean it. I want to become the man Emma used to love. Frank exhaled slowly. He'd seen a lot in his life combat, loss, brothers who didn't come home, and now this, a broken, remorseful young man sitting across from him. Ryan, Frank said, I learned something a long time ago. On the battlefield and off it, people make mistakes. The real test isn't the mistake itself, it's who you become after it. Ryan looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I forgive you, Frank said. But forgiveness and trust are two different things. Trust, you'll have to earn back over time through your actions, through real change. And the decision that matters most here isn't mine to make. It's Emma's. Talk to her, honestly. Tears spilled down Ryan's face. Thank you, Frank. I promise you, I'll prove I can change. Ryan began rebuilding his life from the ground up. He took a modest new job and started over with humility, no shortcuts. He also drew a firm line with Carol. Mom, what you did cost me my wife, my reputation, and nearly my entire future. From now on, I'm making my own decisions, the right ones. For the first time, Carol began to understand that her greed and resentment had cost her son everything. She, too, started to change, though slowly and not without difficulty. Every week, Ryan tried to see Emma, sometimes with flowers, sometimes just to talk. At first, Emma kept her distance, her wounds still raw. "I need time, Ryan," she'd say. "What you did wasn't just one mistake. You tried to humiliate the person I love most in this world." "I know," Ryan would say, "and I won't push you. I just want the chance to prove I can be the man you deserve." Months went by. Ryan worked hard and earned a reputation at his new job for exactly that. He kept visiting Frank too, not for any advantage this time, but out of genuine respect. Slowly, Frank noticed a real change in him. One day, Frank sat down with Emma himself. "Sweetheart," he said, "I won't tell you whether to forgive Ryan or not. That's entirely your call. But I'll say this, people can change if they truly want to. I've seen it firsthand. On the battlefield, the soldiers who seemed weakest sometimes became the strongest, once they understood what they'd done wrong and committed to fixing it." "But Dad, what if I forgive him and he goes back to—" "Then you'll know the forgiveness was misplaced." "But sweetheart, everyone deserves a second chance, especially when they're genuinely trying to earn it. Whatever you decide, I'll stand behind you."
A year passed. Through hard work and honesty, Ryan built a new life for himself. He landed a better job than the one he'd lost, this time without a single shortcut, built entirely on his own merit. Slowly, Emma let him back into her life, first as a friend, then on a new foundation of trust, rebuilt piece by piece. It wasn't easy. Old wounds ached without warning, doubt crept in more than once. But every time, Ryan met it with patience and honesty. For Frank's birthday, Ryan prepared a special gift, a beautifully assembled photo book chronicling Frank's entire military career, pieced together from old records, conversations with Frank's former unit, stories gathered one by one. "Frank," Ryan said, handing it over, "I realized I never gave your real identity the respect it deserved. This book is my way of showing you I understand now who you really are. Not just my father-in-law, but a hero who sacrificed for both his country and his family." Frank's eyes filled with tears he hadn't shed even on the battlefield. He pulled Ryan into a hug. "Son," Frank said, "today, I think you've won something bigger than any battle. You've won a victory over yourself. That's no small thing." Emma watched, her eyes filling too, but this time, with happiness. Slowly, Ryan and Emma's relationship grew strong again. Carol, too, having reckoned with her own role in everything, apologized to Frank, with real shame, and real sincerity. "Mr. Sullivan," Carol said one day, "no apology is enough for what I did to you. But I promise you, from here on, I'll work to bring this family together, not tear it apart." Frank nodded. "Everyone makes mistakes, Carol. The ones who try to make it right deserve respect." Years later, Frank still lived in the same old house, but he was never alone anymore. Every Sunday, Emma, Ryan, and little Grace came by to spend the afternoon. Grace's laughter echoed through the garden, and Frank felt, more than any medal ever gave him, that this was the real prize. One evening, sitting in the garden, Ryan asked Frank, "If you'd never told us who you really were, what do you think would have happened?" Frank smiled, looking out at the sky. "Maybe you never would have changed, son. Sometimes the truth takes its time getting where it needs to go, but it always finds its way, no matter how many layers try to bury it." Emma sat beside her father, resting her head on his shoulder, just like she used to as a little girl. "Dad," she said quietly, "you taught me the biggest lesson of my life, that the truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way home. And love, if it's real, can survive any storm. It just needs a little time, and a little faith." Frank pulled his daughter close, Grace's laughter drifting across the garden, the sun sinking slowly behind the trees, a promise of another beautiful tomorrow. Because no matter what comes, the lies, the schemes, the betrayal, the truth, the love, and the power of forgiveness always win in the end. And any broken family, if they're willing to try with an honest heart, can find their way back together, sometimes stronger than they ever were before. Must subscribe for tomorrow's story.